Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I have three questions I am going to dive into. And these questions are just from my Instagram followers. I'll do a weekly Q&A, and this is something that you would, if you have any specific answer or questions and you'd like me to answer them, your best bet to get these answered is by posting these on Instagram. So just wanted to shoot that out there for you. But yeah, let's dive into the questions. Got three really good questions today. And so the first one's going to be, is basically around intermittent fasting. Is intermittent fasting a tool you can use for muscle gain or for fat loss? So again, just like body comp. And we'll also throw during a like body recomp phase too, but these all kind of go hand in hand here. It's a very popular topic, right? I'm sure, I feel like maybe this doesn't happen as much now, but when I initially gave a lot of talks in person, and a lot of these talks in person usually were from people who don't follow my content, right? There's like local people at the gym or local people at a certain organization, whatever it may be. And they come in with maybe a little less knowledge around all this stuff than, say, a lot of my listeners. But it was inevitable that at the end of it, people would ask, what about intermittent fasting? What do you think about that as a diet? This would be after I would talk about, okay, you need to get into a calorie deficit to drop body fat. And then it was always like, what diet? And the questions around are, can it work for fat loss? Is it healthy? What's the best protocol? How does it work? So we're gonna dive into all these, right? I think with any popular diet protocol, there's gonna be some myths surrounding it, and there's probably gonna be some truths, right? But it's like figuring out what is that and how can it be helpful there. So real quick too, I've also had Matthew Stratton on the podcast multiple times. So if you want to listen to that, search for him. I'm going to quickly look this up while we're on air here, but I want to say it's in the, let's see real quick as I'm scrolling down. But yeah, Matthew Stratton, he is a researcher who does a lot of intermittent fasting research, more so on like fat loss and body comp versus like overall health. But either way, that's what most people would want to use this far. Of course, this is okay. So episode 378, intermittent fasting. We do talk about pre-workout supplementation. So but we do dive into kind of an update on intermittent fasting. So definitely something that you'd want to go and check out there. So anyways, let's talk about what it is. What is intermittent fasting? So intermittent fasting can be defined as a feeding window and a fasting window. During the fasting window, there are no calorie containing items consumed, and it can range from hours to days. During the feeding period, this is where obviously you eat all your calories, right? So we're eating all our calories in that window. So the fasting period is when you're not eating, and the feeding window is obviously when you are not fasted. Now, if you think about it, we all do this daily. When we go to sleep, we're not eating overnight continuously. So we all do some sort of fasting protocol just naturally, right? But let's talk about the specific protocols. So we have alternate day fasting. This is where someone will eat one day and then they don't eat another day. So again, this is a protocol that people will use. I think it's not very practical or feasible for most people. Just imagine a day where you don't eat at all. It sounds pretty crappy. And again, there's really no, yeah. So again, that's one, but that's one that I just think is probably less popular and just really tough to do. And it's hard to fit into any lifestyles. Then we have modified alternate day fasting. This is where someone goes 24 continuous hours without eating. The plus side to this one is that you can eat every day. Just some days will be a little bit lower calorie. So it's just like 24 straight hours. So it's, hey, I had breakfast this morning. It's 10 a.m. Maybe I fast for 24 hours. So it's like I'm not having one entire day of not eating, right? So that can be a strategy that can work. Very similar to alternate day fasting, just modified. Then we have periodic fasting. This is more than 24 hours of continuous fasting. And spoiler alert, again, this is not necessary for fat loss. And this is going to be the one that's just going to be really challenging to stick to, and even more is going to impact your day to day and any social events and anything like that there. And then we have time restricted feeding. So this is probably the one that you'll hear about most for most people, right? This is one where there's designated windows to eat and not to eat throughout the day. So for example, we have 16 hours. So this is like your most common kind of, or one of the most common ones. So it's 16 hours fasting and then 8 hours feeding, right? There's also 20, 24. There's also in 18 and 6. Again, we'll eventually dive into what are the ones that maybe are most practical, and is there any benefit to going any longer? And there's going to be some downsides, but that's what we talk about. And when we say time restricted feeding, and probably what most people mean by intermittent fasting, it's just like, hey, they're cutting off periods of time from eating, right? It's just, hey, I'm not going to eat at X time. And again, you could do certain times, you can change them from day to day, but I'll talk about some things in the practical application that I think are better. According to Matthew Stratton, there are higher adherence rates and less disruption to daily life following a time restricted feeding protocol compared to an alternate day fast or whole day fast, which makes sense, right? An entire day without eating, that's going to be very challenging to do. Again, that's the one where, again, the time restricted feeding ones where you're going to see better adherence rates. And with intermittent fasting, it tells us when to eat, not what to eat. It's just if we were to pull some levers here, I think Peter and Tia actually brought this up. I'm probably going to butcher this, but basically when it comes to eliciting a calorie deficit, and this is fat loss specific, there's some levers we can pull. One, it's you just restrict how much you're eating, right? That's going to be one way to elicit a energy deficit. Another way is obviously cutting out into like food groups or eliminating certain foods, right? And that can be another way. And then three, it's timing. That's another kind of strategy that's in place to decrease how much we eat. But with this too, what this means is you can really have any sort of diet that you want on top of this because it really just pulls that lever of when to eat. So you could do any other particular type of diet. And so I think one of the big upsides of intermittent fasting is that it can help someone decrease their overall energy intake throughout the day. It tricks you into eating less because if we take out a big chunk of when we're eating, you're just naturally you just have less time to eat, which in turn is going to be less time that you're going to be consuming calories. And so in the research, by just telling people to restrict their feeding times, they do reduce their caloric intake by around 20%. Now, this is on average, right? This isn't going to be for everybody, but on average, this is going to be about 20% by just telling people, hey, eat less at a certain time or don't eat during that time. In multiple studies done on intermittent fasting, the research does show that subsequent food intake does not make up for the decrease in energy intake during the fasting protocol. So what that means is, you think, okay, basically that you're not going to make up the food that you're missing out during that period of time. The only time that in the research was that the energy intake in the first meal following the fast was the one that like saw a little bit of an uptick in food, but on a whole, they decrease their overall caloric intake. So again, it's that first one. And so we would just want to be careful with that first meal following the fast. And this makes sense. That's the one that you're most hungry on. So it's like, that's probably going to be the one that you're going to have the highest risk of potentially overeating. And so again, the big thing here with fasting too is going to be weight training and getting in protein there, right? That's going to be super important. A 2016 study from Morrow et al. Had subjects who had at least 5 years of weight training experience. So they had a fasting group and then a regular eating group, and they aimed to get everyone to eat the same amount of protein and calories. They found no difference in muscle mass, but the intermittent fasting group lost weight while the regular group did not. The intermittent fasting group consumed less calories overall. So this study shows that restricting times when the subject could eat made it tougher for subjects to eat the same amount as the regular eating group, therefore helping them get into a calorie deficit. And so all the studies done so far showed that people who eat less lost more weight, and then people who ate more gained or maintained weight, which makes sense, right? And so what this tells us is that there's no special fat loss benefit to intermittent fasting other than it's a tool in the toolbox to help you eat less calories and can be a viable strategy to help somebody get into a calorie deficit, right? This can be useful for somebody who doesn't want to track calories, but wants to lean out or lose weight. A lot of people they shy away from tracking calories, or they just gives them anxiety, or they don't want to do it. And so this can be a tool that you can potentially utilize to just throw in, and it can be a way to help you consume less calories. Now, again, I think the big issue with that is we still want to make sure we're getting in enough protein. We want to make sure that we're not like under eating. We want to make sure we're still getting in a good base of whole foods through this, right? That's probably the biggest mistake I see with fasting, is that if you just decrease calories, that's good, but then that also comes at the expense of, like I said, protein. Now it's just, again, maybe you're potentially consuming too little calories, which can catch up to you later on. You're going to be missing out on maybe some micronutrients, maybe like carbs or fats are off. So again, those would be the big things there. Like you still want to continue to improve your overall like food intake, because I think with people who try to drop weight, and these are just people that they're just decreasing calories. It's like a grind. Like, I'm just going to eat less. I'm going to feel super hungry. I'm not going to really focus on what I'm eating, what I'm fueling my body with. I'm just going to eat less calories. I just find that to be a very challenging way to go about fat loss. You usually see that those situations backfiring, and that's when people regain that weight long term, right? Because they had no focus on their food quality. It was just, hey, I'm going to eat less, I'm going to feel super hungry, I'm going to lose weight, and then I'm just going to go back to what I was doing, right? So again, this is where I could see this approach potentially being where it could potentially backfire. But again, in the research, it shows that, hey, this can be a great way to just help somebody decrease their overall caloric intake by saying, hey, I'm going to cut out a period of time of eating. But there are some downsides to this approach, right? So we know that, again, cutting out period of time will definitely work. Again, I went over a few things to look out for there. There are going to be some downsides. So one, eating for hours could make adherence very challenging, especially if an event comes up during the fasting windows, right? While studies show that energy intake does not increase at later meals, that's on average. Some people may have problems with overeating or might not be able to tolerate the hunger that could come with not eating for hours. For some people, this kind of approach could backfire because you are just super hungry and then it's really hard for you to moderate it. So again, in the research, hey, around 20% caloric decrease, but some people that could come at a high cost of hunger and cravings. And that could, for them, that's going to lead to this potential overeating situation later on. So that's something that knowing yourself and as a coach, knowing my client is going to be super helpful here. So again, it's a great tool in the toolbox for those looking to lose weight and fat, and it can work. But there's definitely some potential downsides here. And so now I want to finish with some practical applications here with us. And actually, real quick, before I go into the practical applications, from a muscle building standpoint, I think with that side of things, we need to, it's not going to be ideal if your main goal is muscle growth. I think in a body recomp phase, maybe you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of muscle. I think if you weight train, you eat enough protein and you place the feeding window put your training within the feeding window, I think for a period of time, this can be a fine way to, recomp if you're a newbie. If you're somebody who has a good amount of muscle already, you've been training for a long time, I don't think this is going to be a great strategy for you. But again, it's not ideal, but you could certainly do it. Obviously, some things to look out for here if that's a goal. So we already know that if you're more of a kind of newbie to weight training, you can make it work for sure. But either way, these would be the things I'd want to focus on. One, we want to make sure our overall protein intake is there for the day. And then we probably want to try and spread that out to 2 to 3 separate meals. I would say I would push you towards 3 if you're really trying. To me, it would be really hard to see any muscle gain, or especially the more you have at 2 meals a day. Again, I'm not saying it can't happen, but I just think that compared to 2 to 3, I would imagine the 3 is going to be a little bit easier. One, it's going to be really hard to get all that protein in 2 meals. But again, from a muscle protein synthesis standpoint and kind of the research on that, I would say 3 meals is probably going to be slightly better if you're really trying to maximize muscle growth. Second thing is reduce how long the fast is. So we probably wouldn't want to do like a 20-hour fasting, 4-hour feeding protocol for somebody who's trying to focus on the muscle building side of things. We're probably looking at the most, I would say 8-hour feeding window. So you're looking at a 16-8 protocol. I think anything more than that, it's going to be really challenging to hit these check marks. And then obviously training around the eating window. So we want to make sure that our training is somewhere around that eating window. It doesn't necessarily have to be in it. It just needs to be somewhere around it from a muscle building standpoint. So again, to sum up the muscle building side of things, it would be a not ideal situation, but we can potentially do it. And I guess the last thing I want to add is the big issue is that it would be really hard to get in the calories that you would need to get in, right? That's the kind of big challenge. We know that it helps reduce caloric intake without people even trying to do that. And again, from a muscle building standpoint, that can be an issue. So you obviously have to make sure you get in enough food during that period of time. But again, from the muscle building side, not ideal. We want to make sure we get our protein in, try to spread that out to 3 separate servings, put the training window, your training around your eating window, and reduce how long the fast is from that. From a body recomp standpoint, again, I think the less muscle you have, the newer you are. Again, same thing applies here. You can definitely recomp, but my same things would apply here where we would want to, what I just said here, we'd want to stack body recomp, right? If body composition is your main goal. If your main goal is just, hey, I need to lose weight, I need to drop body fat, I don't care about muscle, which I think is a mistake. Really with that, it's going to work. It's something that, again, the research, it shows 20% calorie reduction. Really, you can set that up however you like. I still would try to get my protein in 2 to 3 separate servings. With that, you want to make sure you still hit your protein. But again, we know that it can work from a fat loss perspective. So I definitely think that's where it has the best kind of utility is from a fat loss perspective. So again, let's just wrap up with practical applications. Remember, it's just a tool in the toolbox. It's just a tool that we can potentially use. There's no magic fat loss benefit or body comp benefit from it, other than it's a way to reduce your overall caloric intake, which obviously is not great from a muscle building standpoint, but we talked about that. If hunger is an issue with regular eating patterns because your meals are too spread out, then doing intermittent fasting may be beneficial to reduce hunger, right? Because you can tighten everything up there in terms of getting it all in. Start with a more conservative window, right? So don't go straight into 24, right? Do something like 14 fasting, 10 hours eating, then work your way up. There's also in the research very little benefit from going like a 6-hour feeding window to a 4-hour feeding window. So I would say your benefits are maximized around that 6-hour feeding window. So really, there's really no need to go any longer than that from a fasting protocol, right? So you're looking at 18 hours. That would be something like, hey, I'm only going to eat from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. Doing anything longer than that is just you're not going to see any extra potential benefit from that. And it's just going to be harder to adhere to it. You're not going to see any extra fat loss, health benefit from doing that. Again, that's just less time that you could be eating, but that's also time that you're not eating that you could get more hungry. So again, keep that in mind. Probably, again, I would always push people to stick to a restricted feeding, time restricted feeding protocol versus like alternate day fasting, especially in case like events come up and stuff like that there. Again, we want to make sure we're eating enough protein, aim for around 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. This obviously is going to help with building and maintaining muscle, but it's also going to help with satiety, and which helps manage your overall caloric intake, right? So we're already pulling that lever of time restricted feeding, not eating during certain times, but also protein will help with that. Look out for that first meal after a fast, right? This is one that should probably be a little bit higher in like nutrient dense foods like lean protein and fiber, since you're going to be probably hungry, and highly palatable foods following a fast could cause you to potentially overeat. And again, we want to make sure we're training during the feeding window, or if you train in the fasted window, just make sure you consume protein as soon as possible following your workout, right? And then the last thing I want to say on this too is, that in terms of like the timing of when to do it, there's been some research that has shown that I think it's early time restricted. Don't quote me on that saying, but basically having your eating window earlier in the day can potentially help with hunger and cravings. So this would be something where if it's up to me, I'm probably choosing, hey, let's fast later in the day, and then in the morning is when you're eating, right? But that's usually the opposite of what people do. They usually save all their calories for later in the day, and that to me is a strategy that could lead to some overeating at night. So I think it's safer to have that feeding window be as early as you can manage there. And again, the research does back this up that it does help people feel fuller. Again, there was no extra fat loss benefit, but in turn, by feeling fuller, it can help you stick with it longer, which could over time lead to more fat loss, right? So that's my take on fasting. If you need to do it, if not, hopefully this gives you the tools to decide if it's something that's worth it for you. And again, understanding there's no magic benefit, fat loss benefit to it. It's just a tool in the toolbox. All right. So next question is, do I need to train abs in a fat loss phase? And do you need to? No, absolutely not. You don't have to. I think abs are so really that's not going to be the thing that's going to cause you to lean out in your midsection, right? Again, you'll get more defined abs, which can be helpful as you diet down. But really, again, the big thing is going to be that fat loss perspective. So we need to make sure that we're focused on that. And that's going to come through some movement, but also, again, your diet is going to be the key player here. So again, revealing your abs is going to come down to losing body fat and just where your body likes to distribute body fat. For some people, their body likes to hold on to it a little bit longer there. Maybe they distribute a little bit more around their midsection. For some people, they don't really hold a lot of body weight there, or fat there. It distributed out throughout the entire body. So again, but at the end of the day, if we're not seeing our abs, it's more of a body fat issue than it is like, oh, hey, you need to train a ton of abs and shred there. However, I do feel like building your abs helps with seeing them at higher body fat percentages, but not in all cases. And again, I think this comes down to genetics, which would be where your body likes to distribute its fat. But I think the biggest thing here is making sure you train them like any other muscle group. I see a lot of people train the abs differently than they would train other muscle groups. And I think that's a big mistake. And what I mean by that is like a lot of like endless ab circuits, right? Where it's just like, you're just doing a ton of ab work. Oh, I'm going to do 500 sit-ups. That would be like you saying you're going to build massive pecs by just doing like push-ups. Again, you could get decent pecs and whatnot and build a decent physique with push-ups. But at the end of the day, you're going to need that resistance. You're going to need to build strength and get strong versus just using like body weight. So same thing with abs. They grow the same way as any other muscle group. So again, you want to train them the same way in terms of progressive overload. Most of the time in that 8 to 15 rep range, and you're getting stronger in that rep range there. But again, you don't have to train abs in a fat loss phase. It's totally optional. I like to train abs at least 3 to 6 sets a week. And then obviously if I'm in a fat loss phase, I'll probably be closer to, I'll for sure do it. Whereas like when I'm outside of a fat loss phase, I still want to train abs for 3 sets, but I may opt to do a little bit more in a fat loss phase, but you certainly don't need to, right? Again, the way you're going to see abs is ultimately going to come down to your body fat percentage. And that's going to be a movement and nutrition thing. All right. So last question of the day, not overweight, but I need to lose this last 10 to 15 pounds. Is this going to be more diet or training related? And so I think in most cases, if you're not overweight, you've been working out for a while, I think getting into the calorie deficit that is required to lose that last 10 to 15 pounds it's going to be more likely that it's going to be more diet related than it is movement related, right? I think too many times. So, for example, I had a conversation with a client recently who is dealing with some pain. And she mentioned, I think part of the reason why my weight loss is slowed is I'm not able to do the aerobic training at the intensity I want to do. And while that may be playing a small factor in it, at the end of the day, it's a nutrition thing, right? It's a diet thing that is the issue, not the cardio training. That's not going to be the big lever that we're going to pull. Again, it can help, but I think in terms of like cardio standpoint, I think of it as if you go from no cardio to doing some cardio, you're going to start to see an energy and expenditure increase. However, over time, that impact slows down. It's not this like additive effect that it's always just going to continue to see things trend down. So again, I think in the beginning, it's going to be super helpful. And once you get to a certain point, it's going to be better at helping you maintain that body weight than it is from a weight loss perspective. Same thing if somebody goes from, say, 8,000 steps to 12,000. I think initially it's going to help you see things trend down, but eventually the return on that investment is going to go down from a weight loss perspective. It's going to be helpful to help you maintain your weight, which is super important, but it's not going to continue to add to it. So in most situations here, it's a nutrition thing, especially this last 10 to 15 pounds. And nutrition's just hard, especially when you get down to the, say, last 10 to 15 pounds. Like you have to be on top of it day in and day out. But it's to say fat loss dieting is relentless, and it really is, right? You can't just, oh, okay, I can diet, I can take a day off, which you can, but again, that is going to be something that unfortunately will backfire and catch up to you. It's definitely going to be more diet related. However, in saying this, for most people, I also think focusing on adding muscle will help you with losing that kind of quote unquote last 10 to 15 pounds, depending on if you've actually tried to build muscle and spent long periods of time doing that. Again, I think that's a bigger limiting factor. And I bring this up because I think people, when fat loss is their goal, they don't really focus on the muscle building side of things. And I'll build muscle when I lose the weight I want. And I think that's a big mistake that people make. And it ends up being where you feel like you just need to keep losing that last 10 to 15 pounds. So I think that, to play devil's advocate to my first answer, I think it is mostly diet related. However, in a lot of situations, people need to build some muscle, and that's going to help with that last 10 to 15 pounds. And you'll find out that you may not actually need to lose that 10 to 15 pounds, or you may not actually lose that 10 to 15 pounds, but if you add muscle in the process, you'll be much happier at any given body weight. Maybe that last 10 to 15 pounds closer to just 5 more pounds because you're adding that body weight. And we're just being with these numbers here. It's not, oh, hey, you exactly need to lose 10 to 15 pounds. So that means that if you only lose 5 more pounds, that means you gain 5 to 10 pounds of muscle. That's not what I mean. It's just that kind of like theoretical last 10 to 15 pounds that everybody talks about. It's like, hey, I'm in pretty good shape, but I want to look a little bit better. And I think it's, yes, losing some body fat, but I also think that it's also gaining muscle in that process, right? Because otherwise, I find that if you don't include weight training to add muscle, you'll always feel like you need to lose another just 5 to 15 pounds. Oh, I just need to lose 5 more pounds and I'll be where I want to be. Lose that 5 pounds. I just need to lose another 5 to 10 pounds. And it ends up being this vicious cycle. You're not focusing on building muscle, and you just end up getting in that vicious cycle. So to answer the initial question, it's going to be more diet related than you think, right? And that's going to be to help you lose body fat, but you probably also need to focus on building some muscle as well too. So hopefully that answers that question. And that's it for this episode. If you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find it. I appreciate everybody who listens, but want to continue to grow this there. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp. So what it is, how to do it. I also have my free masterclass on nutrition periodization. I go over common mistakes, how to set it up, adjustments you need to make, everything you need to know about each nutrition phase. I go over in that. And then if you haven't given me a follow yet on Instagram, make sure you do. Jeff, that's where I'm most active on social media. And then lastly, if you are struggling to lose that last 10 to 15 pounds, or you're trying to figure out if intermittent fasting is the right approach for you, my free 30-minute strategy calls for you. We'll figure out what the best approach is for you moving forward, and we'll make sure you are set up there, or just if you have any questions as well too there. So that's it for this episode. If you guys have any questions, reach out to me on Instagram, and I'll talk to you soon.